The following presentation is brought to you by the Architecture and Society 5th Year Masters Unit at the University of Dundee. As the City of Dundee continues its regeneration of the central waterfront, Architecture and Society addresses the continuing assertion that the central waterfront development is a catalyst for further urban enhancements, from water's edge to periphery. Gdansk is a city which has much in common with Dundee. Its proposed riverside development has been primed with the construction of catalyst cultural buildings, and so we have used Gdansk as our laboratory to speculate on new forms of urban development that might arise in a series of layers, back from the harbour to the historic centre. This presentation begins by giving you a short introduction to the site, which will give a reference for the topics of our analysis work. Then it will give you an overview of the demographic background, taking you through the history of the city and its morphology. It will then run through some of the urban and architectural qualities of the city, and finish back at the site, which allows for a discussion around our design principles and initial strategies that culminated in our final master plan. In reflecting on the history of Poland, and therefore Gdansk, it is important to understand the context of what has come before. In the Second World War, Poland lost almost 1/5 of its pre-war population to the incredible violence and discriminatory methods which accompanied Nazi occupation. Gdansk was at the forefront of the German attacks, following the Battle of Westerplatte, which started the war. In the more recent history of Gdansk, in August 1980, 17,000 shipyard workers went on strike, defying the orders of management which ultimately founded the Solidarity movement, born out of the first workers' unions in the formerly Soviet-controlled country. The movement consequently kick-started a revolution in Poland, and several other Eastern European countries, to rebel against the rulings of the communist Soviet bloc. These actions inevitably led to the fall of the Iron Curtain. Today, the shipyard area to the north of the historic centre, which was once a bustling construction yard, now lies mostly dormant, with many of the buildings empty, disused, or already demolished. The function that these buildings were designed for is now rapidly disappearing, but their importance to the social history of Poland remains intact. The city is beginning to realise more and more how important the shipyard area can be to the future development of Gdansk, so they have employed Henning Larsson to provide a proposal for the existing shipyard buildings along the waterfront. Our unit has focused on the space between the shipyards and the city, the buffer that connects these two important urban fabrics together, which is currently a vast and uncoordinated expanse of space. The next few drawings are an attempt to introduce Gdansk by highlighting its main geometry and its notable distinctive features. Firstly, looking at Gdansk, its main feature is its river. Its distinctive shape forms and in a way connects our historical shipyard site to the rest of the city. This river is then connected by the coastline, which lies not too far from the main city. Then there are the buildings that line the river, which represent the city's identity, which is its industry, and its well-known history in shipbuilding. The main city then wraps around this core, showing roughly the outline of where the old ring fortifications used to be, and how they used to contain the city. The urban core rests here, as mentioned before. This area also represents the oldest part of the city. The city and its core are integrated together as they both follow the same bent axis. Then, when looking on a bigger scale, you can see the city's clear infrastructure routes, which run alongside the city and form an important intersection. And lastly, the growth along these lines, with the distinctive urban typologies outside of the main city. Together, these elements combine to create the Gdansk that we know today. Through our analysis, we came up with a series of key principles which we would draw inspiration from in creating the master plan. Firstly, it was important to improve the walking routes to the area from the historic centre, improving legibility and access to the site. Then, reference was paid to the sweeping nature of the urban grain. The two existing grids present, namely the Imperial grid, in line with the historic shipyard buildings, and the Resistance grid, in line with the Road to Freedom and the significant buildings of the Solidarity movement, would need to be resolved. By referencing the historical fortifications that were once present on the site, the reintroduction of water to the site as a structuring element was considered. Furthermore, there was a great need to resolve the complex zoning of the site. The larger area had been split up and sold off to multiple developers throughout the years. By creating this master plan, we also aimed to create new green space for the city, as a buffer between the historical centre and the new shipyard redevelopment. The zone of currently unbuilt space would be critical to the development of the master plan. Currently, the site stands vast and uncoordinated, a no man's land. Finally, to encourage connections from further afield, new transport infrastructure connections would be adopted, in line with the city's plans to extend the existing tram network into the shipyard area. From these key principles, the unit then went on to begin developing proposals for the master plan. The studio unit's approach to the existing site was to keep as many of the existing structures as possible. The group agreed that the Henning Larsson proposals would be incorporated, along with the existing and planned housing developments to the east of the site. From there, it was decided which buildings of negligible quality would be removed. Carrying out this process also highlighted existing buildings of interest that had the potential to be included as part of an individual thesis project. After these decisions were taken, a site boundary was drawn around the shoreline and around the border of the city. The completion of this preliminary process in the design of the master plan meant that the site now comprised of new development sites, future development plans, and the historical shipyard buildings of interest. The final master plan shows all 10 individual sites that have been tackled by each member in the group. As well as this, there are indicative masses around these sites that will be left undesigned, but will help highlight and frame key open areas as well as emphasising historical and proposed grids. After various meetings, the final master plan represented an area corresponding not only to our original design principles, but to Gdansk and its existing urban forms. When viewed alongside each other, it's easy to see the impact that the proposed master plan would have on the shipyard area, overall improving and enhancing what it has to offer to the city, all whilst building upon its historic foundations to create new opportunities for its future. Furthermore, this overview of the master plan demonstrates the integration that our unit's individual and collective plans have with the historic shipyards and the existing fabric of the city. This now concludes the presentation on architecture and society in Gdansk. The next image shows the abstract for each of the group members' individual thesis projects. Please feel free to pause the presentation here in order to read the abstracts, or see the individual thesis projects themselves for clarity. All that's left now is to say that from the rest of the group and myself, thank you for listening.